In the 13th year of this century, on the 25th of December, the birthday of Christ, in a square on the edge of Vienna, there was a painter selling postcards. Staying in a cold room without heating, in a hotel on the same square, was a Russian revolutionary. One of the men was Schicklgruber, Adolf Hitler. The other was Joseph Stalin. Who would have believed then that these two men would several years later decide the fate of the planet?
No one could have foreseen that barely 20 years after the meeting that never was, Hitler and Stalin would preside over warring ideologies. Their final struggle would tear Europe apart, lead to the deaths of millions, and reshape the political landscape of the whole world. They were dedicated to each other's destruction, yet each seemed to need the other. They studied each other's careers, respected, even admired each other's cruelty, and used each other to further their own ambitions. In a century of bloodshed, Hitler and Stalin stand out in dreadful symmetry as beacons of evil. Beyond the events that shaped them, did it take a special kind of personality to do what they did? Were the 20th century's greatest enemies, in some fundamental way, the same? Both Hitler and Stalin were outsiders. They came from the far reaches of the great empires into which they were born. Both were later disdained as provincial, vulgar upstarts, and both spoke with strong regional accents all their lives. Joseph Stalin was born in 1878 in Gori in the Republic of Georgia, deep in the Caucasus Mountains, where he's still a hero, despite having turned his back on his native land. He was born Joseph Dugashvili. Stalin, Russian for Man of Steel, was the revolutionary name he took in 1912. While no trace remains of Hitler's birthplace to discourage unwelcome pilgrimage, Stalin's childhood home is still a shrine, encased in a marble facade with a museum next door. Proof, as Stalin said, that victors are never judged. Pilgrims have come in their thousands to pay homage.
A house in Gori. The great Stalin, leader of the working people of the whole world, was born here and lived in this house. From all over the Soviet Union, from all corners of the world, people from different countries come to this spot with a message of love and gratitude.
Joseph Stalin was the son of a cobbler. As a child, he suffered from smallpox, which scarred his face for life. His left arm was withered, the result of an early accident. He grew to be only 5'4" tall, something he was to hide with platform soles. Stalin grew up in a violent household. A childhood friend wrote,
"Undeserved and severe beatings made him as hard and heartless as the father was. Since all people in authority seemed to Stalin to be like his father, there soon arose in him a vengeful feeling against all the people standing above him."
Adolf Hitler, 10 years Stalin's junior, also had a far from idyllic childhood. He was bright but lazy and loved to dream of a life of adventure and excitement. From an early age, he devoured books about war and soldiering. Hitler's parents are buried in Lambach in Austria. Their grave is tended to this day. His father, Alois, was a customs official. He wanted Adolf to follow him into the civil service. The boy was horrified, telling his father he wished to become an artist. "Artist? No, never as long as I live," was the reply. Like Stalin's father, Alois Hitler terrorized his family.
Der Vater war tatsächlich doch ziemlich gewalttätig und hat beide Buben, auch den Halbbruder.
His father was really very violent-tempered and used to beat and hit both boys, Hitler's half-brother as well.
Und
It is clear that Hitler had an extreme aversion to his
Sehr
father.
starke Aversion gegen den Vater hatte.
It was his mother Clara whom Hitler loved passionately. He carried a picture of her with him until his death in the ruins of Berlin. She pampered him as a baby and spoiled him as he grew up. Hitler said of her, "She lived only for her husband and children. They were her entire universe, but she gave a son to Germany." When he came to power, Hitler declared the day of her death the day of honor for the German mother. In 1939, Hitler, Chancellor of Greater Germany, revisited the scenes of his childhood in Austria and the school he attended in Fischlham. In later years, his childhood became tremendously important to him. Hitler used his past to explain what he had become. He said he had been a natural leader of boys and a gifted student. In fact, as an adolescent, he failed badly at school and was twice held back because of poor grades. In 1905, his father dead, Hitler dropped out of school in Linz to fulfill his dream of being a painter. His mother used her pension to support him as he affected the life of the romantic artist. Stalin's mother, Ekaterina, was less indulgent of her son, but just as devoted, sending hampers of Georgian delicacies to him until her death. When Stalin once complained about her beating him as a boy, she replied, "That's why you turned out so well." She wanted him to be a priest and sent him to a Russian Orthodox seminary. It was to change him forever.
He owed a very, very great deal to his mother, because ever afterwards in his life he was literate in Russian, he thought in systematic terms as the church had taught him to do, and he always kept in touch with this lady even when he was in Moscow. He always expressed himself very lovingly towards his mother. He was a very emotional man.
In the repressive atmosphere of the seminary in Tbilisi, the Georgian capital, Stalin grew politically aware.
I became a Marxist on account of my humble upbringing and the rigorous intolerance and Jesuitical discipline that crushed me so cruelly.
Instead of the Bible, he read smuggled copies of Marxist pamphlets. And instead of Christianity, he embraced the new communist faith. His daughter Svetlana was to say that it was here that he came to believe that men were coarse and intolerant, and that they lied and intrigued. In 1899, aged 20, Stalin was already involved in underground communist activities. He left the seminary and dedicated his life to revolution.
It didn't take very much to push someone into objecting to the social and economic conditions in which most people had to live in that empire. But few would-be revolutionaries became quite as committed to authoritarianism, to hierarchy, to discipline, to class war, to revenge of the poor against the rich, as did Stalin.
Stalin had all the brutal commitment of a terrorist. He robbed banks, incited violent demonstrations, and beat up his opponents. He was arrested and exiled to Siberia 7 times. He later described his time in exile.
I hung around mostly with criminals. I remember we used to stop at the saloons in town and drink up every kopeck we had. The criminals were nice, salt-of-the-earth types, but there were lots of rats among the political convicts.